have to fight again, it'll be to take these steps.
As we stand against the war, we also stand behind those who resisted.
More and more U.S. service members are actively refusing to participate in the illegal, immoral invasion and occupation of Iraq.
No more. We have a different path to take, and it doesn't matter what they do to us. It doesn't matter if they take away our honorable discharge, if they put us in prison.
Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
Iraq Vets Against the War is a group of veterans that have served since 9/11 in the War on Terror. And we stand for three things: immediate withdrawal of all U.S. occupying forces from Iraq, reparations for the Iraqi people, and full benefits for all veterans. And the reason I have the flag upside down on my shoulder is because it's a symbol of distress. Because I am very distressed. My friends are being stop-lossed and sent back to Iraq without their consent. The myth of the volunteer army is very distressing to me because it's not a volunteer army. We've been enslaving soldiers for 6 years now under the pretext of a national emergency, which is non-existent. Blackwater, Aegis, Titan, they're all mercenaries, and I have nothing good to say about those assholes. They're scamming the government. They make 15 times more than a normal soldier does, and they have no honor. And I would like nothing more than to see the collapse of those organizations. Only 1/5 of the incidents that go on are reported. So, and that's on a good day. So these guys, they are free from the law. I used to listen to them in the DFAC on Camp Taji, going on and on about, oh, we wasted this guy. And, oh, did you report it? No, why? Why would we do that? I mean, they're the scum of the earth. I think the main thing for Iraq vets is to act, because we've been enslaved for so long. We've been forced to do this. Years of our lives have been given away to a war that's immoral and illegal, and we need to find a way to make that better in ourselves.
While you were in Iraq, did you see any resistance to the war among the troops?
Oh, absolutely. I had to tell you a story.
Okay, when I was in Iraq.
When I was in Iraq, I had a friend. He told me that on Camp Cuervo in 2004, that it was too dangerous to go out during the Shiite militia uprisings. And he said that the company level commanders and the first sergeants, the captains and the first sergeants, started telling their guys it was okay not to go outside the wire, not to do missions. Well, the brigade commander found out about it and instituted this policy of, well, I'm going to check the mileage on the Humvees to see if they actually went out this week. And he went around with the clipboard every Monday, every Humvee in his brigade, he checked the mileage. And of course, the first unit that got caught got yelled at, somebody got in trouble, and what was the response? These first sergeants and company commanders started organizing details to drive around the base in circles. And if that's not an act of GI resistance, I don't know what is. When I was in Bellingham, after I got out of the Army, I had a nightmare, and I woke up, and I started thinking about some things. And these dreams kind of led me to a therapeutic type action. For me, it was to get up on a tower in downtown Bellingham, Washington, in front of the Federal Building, which is a symbol of all the power structure of this country that leads us into war without thinking of the real effects of it. And I decided to protest the stop-loss policy because it's the most immoral of all of the policies in our country right now. You're sending the guys back who have already been there 2-3 times, whose contracts are up. You're breaking their contracts. It's actually illegal, come to find out when I start researching it. It's illegal. It has not been sanctioned by the federal court system. So I started protesting it and started realizing that it was a really powerful issue, because the establishment can't say, you can't justify it, except for the fact that they don't want to have a draft, because there's too many people that are opposed to an illegal, immoral war. So It's kind of the last little thing that's holding the Army together. And the Army is at the breaking point right now. As far 1 and 2 of my friends going back to Iraq for OIF 0709 is stop lost. More than half of my company is stop lost. So I protested that in Bellingham for 8 days and 7 nights on a scaffold that I made into a guard tower. And then I did it again in DC, and I founded the National Stop the Stop Loss campaign.
The film is called Un poquito de tanta verdad, which means a little bit of so much truth. And it's about the popular uprising in Oaxaca, Mexico in 2006, focusing on the movement's use of occupied radio and television stations as a movement building tool. The popular uprising in Oaxaca in 2006 started with a teacher's strike, which is something that happens every year. But in 2006, unlike other years, the governor sent his state police to attack the teachers' strike and the strike encampment when the teachers were all sleeping in the streets of Oaxaca City. And not only attacked the teachers' strike encampment with brutal police force, but also destroyed the teachers' radio station, which had been on the air for a year. And that attack provoked a massive statewide, nonviolent, broad-based popular uprising demanding the removal of the governor from power. And it wasn't so much in response to the attack on the teachers as it was in response to decades of injustice, social, economic, political, racial injustice in one of the poorest states in Mexico, which had endured almost 80 years of single-party rule under a very corrupt and repressive party. And the attack on the teacher strike was kind of the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. So the film follows the evolution of this very broad-based popular movement, which decided to structure itself as an assembly, which in Oaxaca is, the assembly is a form of indigenous governance that requires leaderless horizontal organizational structure and consensus-based decision-making. And through that structure, they decided that they would use nonviolent civil disobedience to render the entire state ungovernable as their strategy for forcing the federal government to remove the governor from power. And part of that civil disobedience and phenomenon was that the movement was taking over radio and television stations, nonviolent takeovers of radio and television stations, and using them first to organize and mobilize their movement, and then ultimately, when the state repression became really extreme, using the radio and television stations to defend themselves, and at the same time using those media outlets to counter the state and commercial media version of what was happening in Oaxaca, which was that a small group of radical vandals was destroying a beautiful tourist destination. So the movement felt it needed to have these media outlets in its hands to counter that misinformation and break through the information blockade about what was happening in Oaxaca.
La dirigencia nacional de los trabajadores de la educación se pronunció en contra de la violencia y la anarquía como forma de presión para resolver demandas.
Son pequeños grupos que pretenden tomar como rehén a la ciudad de Oaxaca.
Los brotes de violencia que se da por integrantes de la APO.
Esta ciudad de Oaxaca está sitiada.
Transmitiendo desde el 1400 de AM, XCVJ, Radio Universidad, la radio de la verdad.
I was there filming for 6 months and sharing footage with a Oaxacan media collective, but I also use recordings from the occupied radio and television stations sort of as the narration for the film, so that in watching the film you hear what the people of Oaxaca heard when they turned on their radio during the 6 months of conflict, and you see what the people of Oaxaca saw when they turned on their local state television station while it was in the hands of the movement. The most intense part of the conflict lasted about 6 months, from June to late November, and ultimately the federal police were sent in to occupy the city. By the time the federal police came in to occupy the city, at least 15 people in the movement had already been killed by paramilitary attacks and plainclothed police attacks. And when the federal police came in, that number went up to 23. And the repression that was unleashed by these two forces together, the federal police on one hand, and them sort of providing coverage and impunity for local paramilitary forces, reached a point that was so extreme that people had to reduce the level of mobilization. I mean, people were being detained and tortured in the hundreds. People were being dragged from their homes. A lot of people were forced into hiding. Some people are still in hiding in other countries for their involvement in the movement and the death threats that they've received. So if you ask people in Oaxaca if the movement is over, they will tell you that in fact it is not at all over, and in many ways it's just beginning. The governor is not removed from power. I believe that had it happened any other year, he would have been removed pretty quickly because he's not a popular politician. But there was this untidy little issue of a presidential election that had been fraudulent and an illegitimate president-elect, which made it impossible for them to start removing illegitimate politicians at the state level because of the precedent that it would have set. But whether or not the movement was a success or not really depends on how you define success. Oaxaca will never be the same in many ways in terms of the people's understanding of their power and their leverage, in terms of the government's understanding of their limitations and what they can get away with, which is a lot less than what they used to get away with. But especially in terms of the way that the Oaxacan people think about media. The 6 months of having more media outlets in their hands than the state really changed the way that people think about community media, and also changed the way about how they consume commercial media. And this is in a state where there's always been a long tradition of community media, especially indigenous radio. But since the uprising, there's an epidemic of communities that want FM transmitters and want workshops on how to get their own community radio on the air, which will, in the long run, have play a much greater role, I think, in removing a bad political system from the sort of rural enclaves that it has in the state of Oaxaca. So I would say that thus far, the movement has been successful in terms of bringing the Oaxacan people together and shifting the way that they think about their power and their relationship to the media. And it's not over. There's still a lot of organizing going on, and there's still a lot of repression. So that they themselves have to figure out how are they going to keep building this movement beneath a progressively more and more repressive situation.
Un comunicado muy importante. En estos momentos se encuentra ya tomada las instalaciones del Canal 9, el canal del gobierno del estado, el canal de Ulises Ruiz. Esta toma fue completamente pacífica, si no me equivoco.
Claro que sí, fue muy pacífica.
On a really visceral level, the film is really important just because what happened in Oaxaca was so unprecedented, not just for Mexico, but unprecedented really in social movement history, in terms of a social movement having so many media outlets in its hands. And also just to witness the absolute popular control of a major capital city is visually really stunning and really inspiring and really mobilizing to see such a broad-based movement across such a spectrum of political ideologies and organizing tactics come together and really not just take over a capital city and a state, but actually do a better job of running it than the government, the official government, had been doing. So on that level, it's just inspiring and mobilizing. On another level, I think it's really important that people have a better understanding of the political situation in Mexico. And what happened in 2006 nationally and in Oaxaca were critical to the political situation in Mexico. And especially in this country, I think it's really critical for people to have a better understanding, not only to be able to act in solidarity with struggles in Mexico, but I also think it's necessary in order to inform the immigration debate in this country. We need to understand the situations that people are coming from if we're going to talk about immigration in this country. But most importantly for me, what I really hope that people will take away from watching this film is a conversation about media and how media affects our lives and our social movements in this country and other countries, and what are we going to do about it. A lot of times when I show the film, people ask me what they can do for Oaxaca, and I know that it's a very natural reaction to want to express solidarity, but I think oftentimes people want that solidarity to come easily. Like people want me to tell them that they can write a check to such and such organization, or that there will be a candlelight vigil in front of the Mexican consulate, that's what they can do for Oaxaca. When really I think what the conversation that needs to happen in this country, and that I would like to see happen amongst people who view this film, is that the media landscape in Oaxaca is really, and in Mexico, is really very similar to the media landscape in this country. And it's a media landscape where the commercial media criminalize social justice movements, thus justifying repression of those movements and creating a huge obstacle to public debate. And without public debate, we don't have a democracy. So what are we going to do about that in this country? And to me, that would be what people could do in response to seeing this film, and would also be a form of acting in solidarity with the people of Oaxaca in terms of taking lessons from what they did, putting their lives on the line, taking huge risks, and many of them are paying for it now, and take those lessons seriously and talk about how we can apply them to struggles in this country.
Este es un derecho a la información, un derecho a la expresión libre, y nosotros estamos pidiendo que se nos respete ese derecho.
A raíz de la programación que pasaba en el Canal 9, cuando ya las compañeras tomaron los micrófonos, entonces yo también pude darme cuenta, con tanta tarugada yo me atontaba viendo novelas, me atontaba viendo programas que no valían la pena. Y ahora en la casa de ustedes nosotros ya no vemos esa televisión.
I had been down in Oaxaca quite a bit between 2003 and 2005, making a previous documentary film called Granito de Arena, or Grain of Sand, about the history of the democratic teachers movement in Mexico, which is a social movement of public school teachers that has its strongest base in Oaxaca. So the majority of the time that I was filming for that documentary, I was in Oaxaca and working very closely with the teachers movement in Oaxaca. And also in the process of making that film, I had begun to collaborate with some community radio stations in different indigenous communities in Oaxaca, and I was collaborating with the teachers when they went on the air with their own radio station, Radio Planton, which was the station that was destroyed in the police attack on the teacher strike in 2006. So when the popular uprising exploded, I actually didn't go down there expecting to make another film. I went down there to deliver some radio gear to Radio Planton so they could get back on the air, and thought that I would shoot a little bit of footage for an epilogue to Grain of Sand, to the previous documentary, because nobody knew what was going to happen in Oaxaca. And I really thought that I was just shooting footage for an epilogue until 3,000 Women took over the state television station. And then it became clear that not only was another film happening or in the works, but that in many ways it was a film about media. But it was the time that I had spent, the fact that I had spent so much time in Oaxaca with a lot of the people who ended up being very involved in this popular uprising, and the fact that a lot of people in Oaxaca had seen and used my previous documentary as an organizing tool, that it gave me the access that I needed when I went back down to film. And it also gave me a lot of context because the situation in Oaxaca was very complicated and the political situation in Mexico in general, and it helped me to have already been there working on a film about a social movement in Oaxaca.
El llamado a la movilización a todo el pueblo de Oaxaca a una movilización pacífica en contra de la intervención de la Policía Federal Preventiva.
La directriz general es no agredir, no hacer una confrontación violenta directa con los elementos de la Policía Federal Preventiva, resistir de una manera masiva y pacífica a estas embestidas que están haciendo los elementos de la Policía Federal Preventiva.
En nombre de Dios no haremos absolutamente ninguna represión.
No se trata de reprimir, no se trata de agredir.
No con el ánimo de reprimir.
Dicen que debemos de cuidarnos porque las tanquetas de aguas están tirando aguas pero con ácido, compañeros. La Asamblea Popular de los Pueblos de Oaxaca llama a todas las organizaciones del país, a todas las organizaciones y hombres sensibles en el mundo a que se manifiesten activamente en apoyo y en solidaridad con el pueblo de Oaxaca.
Hay un enlace desde Francia.
Sí, bueno, compañeros desde Francia, enviamos por nuestra solidaridad, estamos pendientes de lo que pasa mediante la radio en internet. Estamos llamando desde San Francisco, Sacramento, California. En este momento nosotros estamos también haciendo una manifestación. Sabemos lo que está pasando, estamos escuchando, estamos al presente.
This is my third feature-length documentary. I also made a documentary film called Grain of Sand about the history of the Mexican teachers movement, and a documentary called This Is What Democracy Looks Like about the 1999 WTO protests here in Seattle. The documentary that I made about the teachers movement, I made out of a concern for public education in this country, in the US, privatization, standardized testing, defunding. And I thought that a film about the Mexican teachers movement would be could be a tool for educators in the US and other countries in two ways. One, in that it would demonstrate that the attack on public education is in fact part of a global process, and two, that it's possible to resist it. And that's kind of the idea that I carry with me into any project, which is that the world is full of injustices, but there are ways to illuminate those injustices through stories of resistance, because I feel like there's a lot of documentaries in the world, good films, but you feel worse when you come out of the cinema than when you went in. And I don't think we need to constantly be telling ourselves stories of injustice that don't also speak to dignity and resistance. So that was the idea with this most recent film, also with Grain of Sand, in terms of demonstrating to educators that, yeah, the attack on public education sucks, but here's an example of resistance. And likewise with This Is What Democracy Looks Like, which really focused on how was it possible that all these sort of diverse sectors that hadn't organized together for a long time, like anarchists and university students and union folk, were able to come together and shut down an institution that really has a far greater impact in other countries than it does in the US. And why was that, and how did it happen, and what was important about it for social movements in this country, which was also an attempt to sort of raise awareness about the WTO and neoliberalism, but through a story of resistance. And I mean, in addition, aside from that, I've just been doing a lot of independent media work and community radio work for a long time, which is why I got so excited about what was happening in Oaxaca, because it just seemed like a perfect example of what needs to happen everywhere.
Ahora sí es de los verdaderos oaxaqueños, y los oaxaqueños verdaderos son los que están tomando las riendas de este espacio.
¿Ya? ¿Ya hicieron su video? No, todavía no.
Estamos en espera de ese señor Ulises Ruiz. No importa la hora que él venga, aquí lo estamos esperando.
Si nos quiere desalojar de aquí, que nos quite. Pero él mismo que venga, que no mande sus achichingles, que no mande sus perros. Que venga él mismo aquí a sacarnos si tiene huevos para hacerlo.
Con los huevos de Ulises voy a hacer un estrellado para darle de comer a los pinches diputados. ¡Duro, compañera! ¡Duro! ¡Y fuera Ulises!
Something that I think is another, not so much a resource on how to stay informed, but that is a really critical issue right at this moment is the negotiating of Plan Mexico, which is being discussed by Congress now. And it's basically Plan Colombia for Mexico, and it's billions of dollars in financial aid, but also tanks and helicopters and intelligence training and military training for Mexico, supposedly to fight drug trafficking and organized crime. But as we've seen with Plan Colombia, that those resources and training are more often than not used against social movements and insurgencies. And the human rights abuses in Mexico are severe enough to really need to ask the question, how can we, as a country, send tanks and helicopters and military funding to a country that's been already proven that its military is capable of carrying out such heinous human rights abuses. And so people need to inform themselves about Plan Mexico now and when there's still an opportunity to actually fight it.
As we stand against the war, we also stand behind those who resist it.
More and more U.S. service members are actively refusing to participate in the illegal, immoral invasion and occupation of Iraq.
No more. We have a different path to take, and it doesn't matter what they do to us. It doesn't matter if they take away our honorable discharge, if they put us in prison.
Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
Iraq Vets Against the War is a group of veterans that have served since 9/11. They're all mercenaries, and I have nothing good to say about those assholes. They're scamming the government. They make 15 times more than a normal soldier does, and they have no honor. And I would like nothing more than to see the collapse of those organizations. Only 1/5 of the incidents that go on are reported. So, and that's on a good day. So these guys, they are free from the law. I used to listen to them in the DFAC on Camp Taji, going on and on about, oh, we wasted this guy, and oh, did you report it? No, why? Why would we do that? I mean, they're the scum of the earth. I think the main thing for Iraq vets is to act, because we've been enslaved for so long. The mileage on the Humvees to see if they actually went out this week. And he went around with the clipboard every Monday, every Humvee in his brigade, he checked the mileage. And of course, the first unit that got caught got yelled at, somebody got in trouble, and what was the response? These first sergeants and company commanders started organizing details to drive around the base in circles. And if that's not an act of GI resistance, I don't know what is. When I was in Bellingham, after I got out of the Army, I had a nightmare, and I woke up, and I started thinking about some things. And these dreams kind of led me to a therapeutic type action. For me, it was to get up on a tower in downtown Bellingham, watching the War on Terror, and we stand for three things. Immediate withdrawal of all U.S. occupying forces from Iraq, reparations for the Iraqi people, and full benefits for all veterans. And the reason I have the flag upside down on my shoulder is because it's a symbol of distress. Because I am very distressed. My friends are being stop-lossed and sent back to Iraq without their consent. The myth of the volunteer army is very distressing to me because it's not a volunteer army. We've been enslaving soldiers for 6 years now under the pretext of a national emergency, which is non-existent. Blackwater, Aegis, Titan, we've been forced to do this. Years of our lives have been given away to a war that's immoral and illegal, and we need to find a way to make that better in ourselves.
While you were in Iraq, did you see any resistance to the war among the troops?
Oh, absolutely. I had to tell you a story.
Okay, when I was in Iraq.
When I was in Iraq, I had a friend. He told me that on Camp Cuervo in 2004, that it was too dangerous to go out during the Shiite militia uprisings. And he said that the company level commanders and the first sergeants, the captains and the first sergeants, started telling their guys it was okay not to go outside the wire, not to do missions. Well, the brigade commander found out about it and instituted this policy of, well, I'm going to check